agony. Hi friends. My heart hurts. Okay, so I put on a new shirt. I brushed my hair. I'm not changing out of my pajama pants. This is gonna be a long ass fucking video and I wanna be comfortable. So strap yourselves in, guys. Get some tea, get some snacks, because we're about to go on an emotional roller coaster. Today, fellow viewers, I am making the second video in a series. Who knows if I'm ever gonna make another one, but for right now, this is going to be in the same style as a video I have done previously. Today, we are going to be covering every single boreo moment in The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. So to give some context here really quick, I have a video on my channel that I uploaded a few months ago that you guys seem to like a lot, called Every Ready Moment in It by Stephen King, which was going over every single interaction that the characters of Richie and Eddie, who a good number of people ship. We went over every single moment of where they interacted in the book, because it was a long-ass book, and a lot of people don't want to read it, and I understand that, and I gave my contribution to the fandom. You all accepted my contribution to the fandom. It was a nice time. Now, this is a lovely book that I finished 10 minutes ago, less than 10 minutes ago, and I swear to God, I don't think I've left the house in 5 days, because I have been reading this book, because nothing else matters in the world other than this book to me right now, okay? I am in agony. So, this is called The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. It's a Pulitzer Prize winning novel. It's amazing. We're gonna go over that, but there is a movie coming out on September 13th, starring many amazing people who we love and stan. It's got Finn Wolfhard, Ansel Elgort, Nicole Kidman, Sarah Paulson, Dennis O'Hare, Emmett from Legally Blonde. Like, we're here for it. It's gonna be amazing. The trailers look amazing. I reacted to one of the trailers in my last video, and that's gonna tie into this right here. So if you are unfamiliar, this book follows the story of this young boy named Theo Decker, whose mother dies in a terrorist bombing at the Met, or this big art museum in New York, and he survives, and he steals his mother's favorite painting from the museum, which is this tiny little painting of a goldfinch, which is a bird. He steals this painting, and it's basically about him cycling through different guardians and kind of trying to keep this painting a secret. And then there's a time jump to like 8 or 9 years later, and he's an adult, and more shit goes down regarding this painting. So, there is also a very lovely ship in this book that a lot of people have now noticed. And that is between Theo Decker and Boris Pavlovsky, who is being played by Finn Wolfhard in the movie. We know I'm an It stan, I'm a Stranger Things stan, but you know, what better way to continue the Ready legacy than with another gay Finn Wolfhard ship, you know? So I wanted to give the people what they want and what they deserve, give the It fans, give the Stranger Things fans what they can expect in this film, because oh man, oh, strap yourselves in, because it's something else. You thought Ready was canon? No. This shit's canon. So as you can see, I have marked many different pages as I was going along and reading, because I figured that I should make this video, and I have some tabs at the top. So, like I said, this book is split into 2 different parts. It's when Theo is a child, and when Theo is an adult. So, these pink and orange tabs here are pages that are marked of Boris and Theo as a child moments, and these green and blue tabs are Theo and Boris as adult moments. And then there are some orange ones at the end because I ran out of blue and green tabs, okay? We're not going to talk about it. It's fine. So, we're going to give you a quick recap up until this moment where the Boris and Theo moments start. So, Theo, after his mother dies, he goes and stays with his friend Andy's family, Andy Barber. So with Andy's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Barber, and then his siblings, Platt, Kitsy, Toddy, and Andy. Mrs. Barber is Nicole Kidman, okay? We're gonna connect the dots here. In case you know nothing about this story, I'm gonna help you guys out. Alright, so he goes and stays with his family. Everything's going great. You know, he's hella depressed because his mother just fucking died. His dad is not in the picture. His dad left a couple years prior, so he goes and stays with his friend's family. It's starting to look really good. It's starting to look like this family might adopt him. And then his deadbeat dad shows up out of nowhere and is like, I should probably take this child since it's mine, even though I haven't talked to him in years and wasn't giving him and his mother child support, and I hate his mother. And he shows up with his girlfriend, Sandra, and Sandra is being played by Sarah Paulson, my mother. I love her. And it's gonna be a great time. So Theo's dad and Sandra show up and they take him to Las Vegas, which is where they live. And they live in this kind of suburb in the desert in the middle of nowhere, and that's where Theo meets our lovely boy, Boris Pavlovsky. So I have some things that I've tabbed that I want to come back to later because they're not really going to make much sense without more context. So we're going to start on pink tab number 1, which is the first time he meets Boris. First time Boris comes in the picture. Lovely boy. Also, I want to explain real quick, in case you haven't seen my ready video, I'm going to be reading every single thing that I marked that I think is substantial as boreo shipping material. There are way more instances in this than there are ready moments in it, simply because there are way less characters in this. Him and Boris's relationship is way more crucial to the plot than ready is in it. So I'm sure there are going to be some things that are interaction between them that I skip because they're simply not substantial. Because there are probably about 200 straight pages of just Theo constantly hanging out and or speaking about Boris, because that's just how the story goes. We're not going to sit here and read all of that, okay? So, we're going to read the substantial stuff, and I'm not going to talk about every single thing like in my ready video because we would be sitting here for hours. I'm just going to talk about things that I kind of want to explain and I have thoughts about, which are a lot of these. So, let's strap in. Let's go. Toru is always just sitting around on his can telling us how good he has it. Because, said the Dragon Ball Z boy, his voice raising gleefully, if everybody dropped out, like he's saying to do, what kind of community would we have? If it was just people like him. We wouldn't have hospitals and stuff. We wouldn't have roads. Twat, mumbled a welcome voice, just loud enough for everybody around to hear. I turned to see who had said this. The burnout-looking boy across the aisle, slouched and drumming his desk with his fingers. When he saw me looking at him, he raised a surprisingly lively eyebrow, as if to say, can you believe these fucking idiots? My neighbor let out a sharp, contemptuous bark of laugh. He was pale and thin, not very clean, with lank dark hair falling in his eyes and the unwholesome wanness of a runway, callous hands, and black circled nails chewed to the nub. Not like the shiny-haired, ski-tan skate rats from my school on the Upper West Side, punks whose dads were CEOs and Park Avenue surgeons, but a kid who might conceivably be sitting on a sidewalk somewhere with a stray dog on a rope. The dark-haired boy scowled and sank deeper into his seat. He reminded me of the homeless-looking kids who stood around passing cigarettes back and forth on St. Mark's Place, comparing scars, begging for change, same torn-up clothes and scrawny white arms, same black leather bracelets tangled at the wrists. Their multi-layered complexity was a sign I couldn't read, though the general import was clear enough. Different tribe, forget about it. I'm way too cool for you. Don't even try to talk to me. Since was my mistaken first impression of the only friend I made when I was in Vegas, and as it turned out, one of the great friends of my life. His name was Boris. Somehow we found ourselves standing together in the crowd that was waiting for the bus after school that day. Ha, Harry Potter, he said as he looked me over. Fuck you, I said listlessly. This was not the first time in Vegas I'd heard the Harry Potter comment. My New York clothes, khakis, white Oxford shirts, the tortoiseshell glasses, which I unfortunately needed to see, made me look like a freak at a school where most people dressed in tank tops and flip-flops. Where's your broomstick? Left it at Hogwarts, I said. What about you? Where's your board? He said, leaning into me and cupping his hand behind his ear with an old-mannish, deaf-looking gesture. He was half a head taller than me. Along with jungle boots and bizarre old fatigues with the knees busted over, he was wearing a ratted-up black t-shirt with a snowboarding logo, Never Summer, in white Gothic letters. Your shirt, I said with a curt nod. Not much boarding in the desert. Nyah, said Boris, pushing the stringy dark hair out of his eyes. I don't know how to snowboard. I just hate the sun. We ended up together on the bus, in the seat closest to the door, clearly an unpopular place to sit, judging from the urgent way other kids muscled and pushed to the rear. But I hadn't grown up riding on a school bus, and apparently neither had he, as he too seemed to think it was only natural to fling himself down in the first empty seat up front. For a while we didn't say much, but it was a long ride, and eventually we got to talking. It turned out he lived in Canyon Shadows too, but further out, the end that was getting reclaimed by the desert, where a lot of the houses weren't finished, and sand stood in the streets. "How long have you been here?" I asked him. It was the question all the kids asked each other at my new school, like we were doing jail time. Dunno, 2 months maybe? Though he spoke English fluently enough, with a strong Australian accent, there was also a dark, slurry undercurrent of something else, a whiff of Count Dracula, or maybe it was a KGB agent. "Where are you from?" "New York," I said, and was gratified at his silent double-take, his lowered eyebrows that said, "Very cool." "What about you?" He pulled a face. "Well, let's see," he said, slumping back in his seat and counting off the countries on his fingers. "I've lived in Russia, Scotland, which was maybe cool, but I don't remember it, Australia, Poland, New Zealand, Texas for 2 months, Alaska, New Guinea, Canada, Saudi Arabia, Sweden, Ukraine." Jesus Christ. He shrugged. "Mostly Australia, Russia, and Ukraine, though. Those 3 places. Do you speak Russian?" He made a gesture that I took to mean more or less. "Ukrainian, too, and Polish, though I've forgotten a lot. The other day I tried to remember what the word was for dragonfly, and couldn't. Say something." He obliged, something spitty and guttural. "What does that mean?" He chortled. "It means fuck you up the ass." "Yeah? In Russian?" He laughed, exposing grayish and very un-American teeth. "Ukrainian. And I thought they spoke Russian in the Ukraine." "Well, yes, depends what part of the Ukraine. They're not so different languages, the two." "Well," click of the tongue, eye roll, "not so very much. Numbers are different, days of the week, some vocabulary. My name is spelled different in Ukrainian, but in North America it's easier to use Russian spelling and be Boris, not Borys. And the West, everybody knows Boris Yeltsin." He tipped his head to one side. "Boris Becker, Boris Badenov." "Eh?" he said sharply, turning as if I'd insulted him. "Bullwinkle? Boris and Natasha? Ah, yes, Prince Boris. War and Peace. I'm named like him, although the surname of Prince Boris is Drubetowski, not what you said." He shrugged. "Polish, maybe," he said, falling back in his seat, slinging his dark hair to one side with the flip of his head. I want to pause real quick, because, the amount of times that Theo talks about Boris's hair in this 800-page book is kind of ridiculous. I could make a whole video of just every single time that Theo talks about Boris's hair. That would actually be really funny. Should I do that? No, but this bitch, this bitch has Finn Wolfhard hair. It's gonna be so good. I'm so excited. He's gonna do such a good job. I'm so excited. "What do you think about America? Everyone always smiles so big." "Well, most people. Maybe not so much you." "I think it looks stupid." Boris's mother, his father's second wife, was dead. "Mine too," I said. He shrugged. "She's been dead for donkey's years." He said. "She was an alkie. She was drunk one night and she fell out a window and died." "Wow," I said, a bit stunned by how lightly he tossed this off. "Yeah, it sucks," he said carelessly, looking out the window. "So what nationality are you?" I said after a brief silence. "Eh?" "Well, if your mother's Polish and your dad's Ukrainian and you were born in Australia, that would make you Indonesian," he said with a sinister smile. He had dark, devilish, very expressive eyebrows that moved around a lot when he spoke. "How's that?" "Well, my passport says Ukraine, and I have part citizenship in Poland too, but Indonesia is the place I want to go back to," said Boris, tossing the hair out of his eyes. "Hair? What's it like?" "Not so bad," he said, glancing at me sideways in his brooding, self-amused way. "I had a parrot, and a pet goose, and was learning to surf, but then, 6 months ago, my dad hauled me with him to his shanty town in Alaska, Seward Peninsula, just below Arctic Circle, and then, middle of May, we flew to Fairbanks on a prop plane, and then we came here." "Wow," I said. "Dead boring up there," said Boris. "Heaps of dead fish, and bad internet connection. I should have run away. I wish I had," he said bitterly. "And done what?" "Stayed in New Guinea, lived on the beach." "What does your dad do again?" "Drink, mainly," said Boris sourly. "He should meet my dad, then." Again, the sudden explosive laugh, almost like he was spitting over you. "Yes, brilliant. And horse?" "Wouldn't be surprised," I said, after a small, startled pause. The bus was emptying out. We were only a few streets from my house. "Hey, this is my stop here," I said. "Want to come home with me and watch television?" said Boris. "Well, oh, come on. No one's there, and I've got SOS Iceberg on DVD. The school bus didn't actually go all the way out to the edge of Canyon Shadows, where Boris lived. It was a 20-minute walk to his house from the last stop, in blazing heat, through the streets awash with sand. "They built this shit way too far out," said Boris. "Now the desert is taking it back. And the banks." He laughed. "Fuck Thoreau, eh? This whole town is like a big fuck you to Thoreau. I'll tell you who's fucked. People who own these houses. Can't even get water out to a lot of them. They all get taken back because people can't pay. That's why my dad rents our place so bloody cheap." Huh, I said after a slight startled pause. My dad digs mines, said Boris unexpectedly. Sorry? He raked the sweaty dark hair out of his face. People hate us everywhere we go because they promise the mine won't harm the environment, and then the mine harms the environment. But here, he shrugged in a fatalistic, Russianate way. My God, this fucking sandpit, who cares? Huh, I said, struck by the way our voices carried down the deserted street. Something to drink? Said Boris, opening the refrigerator to a gleaming rig of German beer bottles. Oh wow, thanks. In New Guinea, said Boris, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. When I lived there, yeah? We had a bad flood. Snakes, very dangerous and scary. Unexploded mine shells from the Second World War floating up to the yard. Many geese died. Anyway, he said, cracking open a beer. All our water went bad. Typhus. All we had was beer. Pepsi was all gone. Lucozade was all gone. Iodine tablets were gone. 3 whole weeks. My dad and me. Even the Muslims. Nothing to drink but beer. Lunch, breakfast, everything. That doesn't sound so bad. He made a face. Had a headache the whole time. Local beer in New Guinea. Very bad tasting. This is the good stuff. There's vodka in the freezer, too. I started to say yes, to impress him, but then I thought of the heat and the walk home, and said, no thanks. Say, want to see my room? I was expecting something on the order of my own room, and was surprised when he opened the door into a sort of ragtag-tinted space, reeking of stale Marlboros, books piled everywhere, old beer bottles and ashtrays, and heaps of old towels and unwashed clothes spilling over onto the carpet. The walls billowed with printed fabric, yellow, green, indigo, purple, and a red hammer and sickle flag hung over the batik-draped mattress. It was as if a Russian cosmonaut had crashed from the jungle and fashioned himself a shelter of his nation's flag and whatever narrative sarongs and textiles he could find. You did this? I said. I folded it up and put it in a suitcase, said Boris, throwing himself down on the wildly colored mattress. Takes only 10 minutes to put up again. Do you want to watch SOS Iceberg? Sure. Awesome movie. I've seen it 6 times, like when she gets in her plane to rescue them on the ice. But somehow, we never got around to watching SOS Iceberg that afternoon, maybe because we couldn't stop talking long enough to go downstairs and turn on the television. Boris had had a more interesting life than any person of my own age I had ever met. It seemed that he had only infrequently attended school, and those of the very poorest sort, out in the desolate places where his dad worked. Often there were no schools for him to go to. It was getting late, but still hot and bright out. Say, I'm starving, said Boris, standing up and stretching so that a band of stomach showed between his fatigues and ragged shirt, concave, dead white, like a starved saint's. That's kind of gay. It's too early to be diving into that, but just put a pin in that. Put a pin in that description, and we're going to come back to it later. Well, look, let's go to my house, then. He flung himself down on the bed with his hands between his knees. Don't tell me the slag cooks. No, but she works in a bar with a buffet. Sometimes she brings home food and stuff. Brilliant, said Boris, reeling slightly as he stood. He'd had 3 beers and was working on a 4th. At the door, he took an umbrella and handed me one. What's this for? He opened it and stepped outside. Cooler to walk under, he said, his face blue in the shade, and no sunburn. By the way, they're like... Theo is like 14, and Boris is like 15 at this point in the story. I realize I didn't say that. They're not like children. Like, they're not like 12. But they're also not like 17, you know? Like, they're like 14 and 15. Okay, put a pin on that too. For Boris, I had borne my solitude stoically enough, without realizing quite how alone I was. And I suppose if either of us had lived in an even halfway normal household, with curfews and chores and adult supervision, we wouldn't have become quite so inseparable, so fast. But almost from that day we were together all the time, scavenging our meals and sharing what money we had. In New York, I had grown up around a lot of worldly kids who'd lived abroad and spoke 3 or 4 languages, who did summer programs at Heidelberg and spent their holidays in places like Rio or Innsbruck or Cap d'Antibes. But Boris, like an old sea captain, put them all to shame. He had ridden a camel, he had eaten witchetty grubs, played cricket, caught malaria, lived on the street in Ukraine, but for 2 weeks only, set off a stick of dynamite by himself, swam in Australian rivers infested with crocodiles. He had read Chekhov in Russia and authors I'd never heard of in Ukrainian and Polish. Every day we rode home on the bus together, at the half-finished community center on the edge of Dostoya Estates, where the doors were padlocked and the palm trees stood dead and brown on the planters. There was an abandoned playground where we bought sodas and melted candy bars from the dwindling stock in the vending machines, sat around outside on the swings, smoking and talking. His bad tempers and black moods, which were frequent, alternated with unsound bursts of hilarity. He was wild and gloomy. He could make me laugh sometimes until my sides ached, and we always had so much to say that we often lost track of time and stayed outside talking until well past dark. Okay, this next section I want to talk about, and I'm reading it because it's going to tie back to something that I'm going to talk about right afterwards. So, He told me, too, how in Indonesia he had been converted to Islam by his friend Bami the cook, giving up pork, fasting during Ramadan, praying to the Mecca 5 times a day. But I'm not Muslim anymore, he explained, dragging his toe in the dust. We were lying on our backs in the merry-go-round, dizzy from spinning. I gave it up a while back. Why? Because I drink. This was the understatement of the year. Boris drank beer the way other kids drank Pepsi, starting pretty much the instant we came home from school. But who cares? I said, why does anybody have to know? He made an impatient noise, because it's wrong to profess faith if it doesn't observe properly. Disrespectful to Islam. Still, Boris of Arabia, it has a ring. Fuck you. No, seriously, I said, laughing, raising up on my elbows. Did you really believe in all that? All what? You know, Allah and Muhammad, there's no God but God. No, he said, a bit angrily. My Islam was a political thing. What do you mean, like the shoe bomber? He snorted with laughter. Fuck, no. Besides, Islam doesn't teach violence. Then what? He came up off the merry-go-round, alert gaze. What do you mean, what? What are you trying to say? Back off, I'm asking a question, which is, if you converted to it and all, then what did you believe? He fell back and chortled as if I had let him off the hook. Believe? Ha! I don't believe in anything. What, you mean now? I mean never. Well, the Virgin Mary, a little, but Allah and God, not so much. Then why the hell did you want to be Muslim? Because, he held out his hands, as he did sometimes when he was at a loss. Such wonderful people. They were all so friendly to me. That's a start. Well, it was, really. They gave me an Arabic name, Badr al-Din. Badr is moon. It means something like moon of faithfulness. But they said, Boris, you are Badr, because you light everywhere. Being Muslim now, lighting the world with your religion. You shine wherever you go. I loved it, being Badr. Pause. So this book is split up into different chapters of Theo's life. There are, 8 of them, and they all have a name. And what is the name of this chapter of his life? It's Badr al-Din, which is not only sweet, because that whole chapter of his life is Boris, that's it, that's the name, but because I'm going to read it again. Badr is moon. It means something like moon of faithfulness, but they said, Boris, you are Badr because you light everywhere. Being Muslim now, lighting the world with your religion, you shine wherever you go. So that's how he remembered him, as, a guiding light in his life, and something bright, and just, do you see what I'm getting at? That's really sweet. Okay, let's move on. Though he knew a lot about movies and music, he was decades behind the times. He didn't have a clue about sports or games or television, and apart from a few big European brands like Mercedes and BMW, couldn't tell one car from another. American money confused him, and sometimes, too, American geography. In what province was California located? Could I tell him which city was the capital of New England? But he was used to being on his own. Cheerfully, he got himself up for school, hitched his own rides, signed his own report cards, shoplifted his own food and school supplies. Once every week or so, we walked miles out of our way in the suffocating heat, shaded beneath umbrellas like Indonesian tribesmen, but among its stops was a shopping plaza with a chilly, gleaming, understaffed supermarket where Boris stole steaks for us, butter, boxes of tea, cucumbers, a great delicacy for him, packages of bacon, even cough syrup once when I had a cold. That's cute. Slipping them in the cutaway lining of his ugly gray raincoat, a man's coat, much too big for him, with drooping shoulders and a grim Eastern Bloc look about it, a suggestion of food rationing in Soviet-era factories, industrial complexes in Lviv or Odessa. As he wandered around, I stood lookout at the head of the aisle, so shaky with nerves I sometimes worried I would black out. But soon I was filling my own pockets with apples and chocolate, other favored food items of Boris's, before walking up brazenly to the counter to buy bread and milk and other items too big to steal. Back in New York, when I was 11 or so, my mother had signed me up for a Kids in the Kitchen class at my day camp, where I'd learned to cook a few simple meals, hamburgers, grilled cheese, which I'd sometimes made for my mother on nights she worked late, and what Boris called eggs and toasts. Boris, who sat on the countertop, kicking the cabinets with his heels and talking to me while I cooked, did the washing up. In the Ukraine, he told me, he'd sometimes picked pockets for money to eat. Got chased once or twice, he said. Never caught, though. Maybe we should go down to the strip sometime, I said. We were standing at the kitchen counter in my house with knives and forks, eating our steak straight from the frying pan. If we were going to do it, that'd be the place. I never saw so many drunk people, and they were all from out of town. He stopped chewing. He looked shocked. And why should we, when so easy to steal here, from so big stores? Just saying. My money from the doormen, which Boris and I spent a few dollars at a time, and vending machines and at the 7-Eleven near school that Boris called the magazine, would hold out a while, but not forever. Ha! And what will I do if you're arrested, Potter? He said, dropping a fat piece of steak down to the dog, whom he had taught to dance on his hind legs. Who will cook the dinner? And who will look after Snaps here? Sandra's dog Popper he'd taken to calling Emil and Nitrate and Popchick and Snaps, anything but his real name. I'd started bringing him in, even though I wasn't supposed to, because I was tired of him always straining at the end of his chain, trying to look at the glass door and yapping his head off. But inside he was surprisingly quiet, starved for attention. He stuck close to us wherever we went, trotting anxiously at our heels, upstairs and down, curling up to sleep on the rug while Boris and I read and quarreled and listened to music up in my room. Seriously, Boris, I said, pushing the hair from my eyes. I was badly in need of a haircut, but I didn't want to spend the money. I don't see much difference in stealing wallets and stealing snakes. Big difference, Potter. He held his hands apart to show me just how big. Stealing from working person and stealing from big rich company that robs the people? Costco doesn't rob the people, it's a discount supermarket. Fine then, steal essentials of life from private citizen. This is your so smart plan. Hush, he said to the dog, who'd bark sharply for more steak. I wouldn't steal from some poor working person, I said, tossing Popper a piece of steak myself. There are plenty of sleazy people walking around Vegas with wads of cash. Sleazy? Dodgy. Dishonest. Ah, the pointed dark eyebrow went up. Fair enough, but if you steal money from sleazy person, like gangster, they are likely to hurt you, yeah? You weren't scared of getting hurt in Ukraine? He shrugged. Beaten up, maybe, not shot. Shot? Yes, shot. Don't look surprised. This cowboy country, who knows? Everyone has guns. I'm not saying a cop, I'm saying drunk tourists. The place is crawling with them on a Saturday night. Ha! He put the pan down on the floor for the dog to finish off. Likely you will end up in jail, Potter. Luis Morales, slave to the economy. Very bad citizen, you. Okay, so, they're domestic as fuck, okay? This is where it begins. They're so domestic. Like, they just cook together and, like, take care of their dog. And, like, it's so wholesome and nice and we love it and we're here for it. I'm tearing up. They're so cute. Okay, let's continue. By this time, October or so, we were eating together almost every night. Boris, who'd often had 3 or 4 beers before dinner, switched over at mealtimes to hot tea. Then, after a post-dinner shot of vodka, a habit I'd soon picked up from him, it helps you digest the food, Boris explained. We lolled around reading, doing homework, and sometimes arguing, and often drank ourselves to sleep in front of the television. Don't go, said Boris, one night at his house when I stood up toward the end of the Magnificent Seven, the final gunfight, Yul Brynner rounding up his men. You'll miss the best part. Yeah, but it's almost 11. Boris, lying on the floor, raised himself on an elbow. Long-haired, narrow-chested, weedy and thin, he was Yul Brynner's exact opposite in most respects, and yet there was also an odd familial resemblance. They had the same sly, watchful quality, amused and a bit cruel, sometimes Mongol or Totter in the slant of the eyes. Call Sandra to come and collect you, he said with a yawn. What time does she get off work? Sandra? Forget it. Again, Boris yawned, eyes heavy-lidded with vodka. Sleep here, then, he said, rolling over and scrubbing his face with one hand. Will they miss you? Were they even coming home? Some nights they didn't. Doubtful, I said. Hush, said Boris, reaching for his cigarettes, sitting up. Watch now. Here come the bad guys. You saw this movie before? Dubbed into Russian, if you can believe it, but very weak Russian sissy. Is sissy the word I want? More like school teachers than gunfighters, is what I'm trying to say. We're getting there. We're getting to it. We're getting to the stuff I want to talk about. That night at Boris's, lying drunk on my half of the batik draped mattress, I tried to remember what Pippa had looked like, but the moon was so large and clear through the uncurtained window that it made me think instead of a story my mother had told me about driving to horse shows with her mother and father in the backseat of their old Buick when she was little. A rustle next to me. Potter, said Boris, you awake? Can I ask you something? I said. What does the moon look like in Indonesia? What are you on about? Or, I don't know, Russia? Is it just the same as here? He rapped me lightly on the side of the head with his knuckles, a gesture of his that I'd come to know, meaning idiot. Same everywhere, he said, yawning, propping himself up on his scrawny, braceleted wrist. And why? Dunno, I said, and then after a tense pause. Do you hear that? A door had slammed. What's that? I said, rolling to face him. We looked at each other, listening. Voices downstairs, laughter, people knocking around, a crash like something had been knocked over. Is that your dad? I said, sitting up, and then I heard a woman's voice, drunken and shrill. Boris sat up too, bony and sickly pale in the light through the window. Downstairs it sounded like they were throwing things and pushing furniture around. What are they saying? I whispered. Boris listened. I could see all the bolts and hollows in his neck. Bullshit, he said. They're drunk. The two of us sat there listening, Boris more intently than me. Who's that with them? Who's that with him, then? I said. Some whore. He listened for a moment, brow furrowed, his profile sharp in the moonlight, and then lay back down. 2 of them. I rolled over and checked my iPod. It was 3:17 in the morning. Fuck, groaned Boris, stretching his stomach. Why don't they shut up? I'm thirsty, I said, after a timid pause. Are you? Sorry. Sorry. He snorted. Ha, you don't want to go out there now, trust me. What are they doing? I asked. One of the women had just screamed. Whether in laughter or fright, I couldn't tell. We lay there, stiff as boards, staring at the ceiling, listening to the ominous crashing and bumping about. Ukrainian? I said after a bit, though I couldn't understand a word of what they were saying. I'd been around Boris enough that I was beginning to differentiate the nations of spoken Ukrainian from Russian. Top marks, Potter. Then, light me a cigarette. We passed it back and forth in the dark until another door slammed forward, and the voices died down. At last, Boris exhaled a final smoky sigh and rolled over to stub it out on the overflowing ashtray beside the bed. "Good night," he whispered. "Good night." He fell asleep almost immediately, I could tell from his breathing, but I lay awake a lot longer, with a scratchy throat, feeling lightheaded and sick from the cigarette. How I had fetched up into this strange new life, where drunk foreigners shouted around me in the night, and all my clothes were dirty, and nobody loved me. "Just wait, sweetie. Wait a few more pages." Boris, oblivious, snored beside me. Several weeks passed with no thought of Boris's dad at all, but then came the day when Boris slid in late to honors English with a wine-colored bruise under his eye. "Ah, got it in the face with the football," he said in a cheery voice when Mrs. Spirit Sakya, he called her, asked him suspiciously what had happened. This, I knew, was a lie. Glancing over at him across the aisle, I wondered throughout our listless class discussion of a Ralph Waldo Emerson how he'd managed to black his eye after I'd left him the previous night to go home and walk Popper. Sandra had left him tied up outside so much that I was starting to feel responsible for him. "What'd you do?" I said when I caught up with him after class. How'd you get that?" He winked. "Oh, come on," he said, bumping his shoulder against mine. "What? Were you drunk?" "My dad came home," he said, and then when I didn't answer, "What else, Potter? What did you think?" "Jesus, why?" He shrugged. "Glad you'd gone," he said, rubbing his good eye. "Couldn't believe when he showed up. Was sleeping on the couch downstairs. At first I thought it was you." "What happened?" "Ah," said Boris, sighing extravagantly. He'd been smoking on the way to school. I could smell it on his breath. He saw the beer bottles on the floor. "He hit you because you were drinking?" "Because he was fucking plastered, that's why. He was drunk as a log. I don't think he knew it was me he was hitting. This morning he saw my face. He cried and was sorry. Anyway, he won't be back for a while." "Why not?" "He's got a lot going on out there," he said. "Won't be back for 3 weeks." "Well, see you after class," said Boris. "Explain again, before I go. What's the difference between Federal Bank and Federal Reserve? Did you tell anybody?" "Tell what?" "You know. What, you want to report me?" said Boris, laughing. "Not you, him." "And why? Why is that a good idea? Tell me, so I can get deported." "Right," I said, after an uncomfortable pause. "So, we should eat out tonight," said Boris. "In a restaurant, maybe the Mexican." Boris, after initial suspicion and complaint, had grown to like Mexican food. "Unknown in Russia," he said. "Not bad when you get used to it, though if it was too spicy he wouldn't touch it. We can take the bus. The Chinese is closer, and the food is better." "Yeah, but remember?" "Oh yeah, right," I said. "The last time we'd eaten there, we'd slipped out without paying. Forget that." "We love cute boys going on cute dates. So cute." "Who pays the bills here, Potter?" he said. "Huh?" It was the first time that question, which I immediately recognized as of great practical importance, had even occurred to me. "I don't know. My dad, I think. Though Sandra puts in some too. And where does he get it? His monies?" "No clue," I said. "He talks to people on the telephone, and then he leaves the house." "Any checkbooks lying around? Any cash?" "No, never. Chips sometimes. As good as cash," Boris said swiftly, spitting a bitten-off thumbnail onto the floor. "Right, except you can't cash them in the casino if you're under 18. Boris chortled. "Come on, we'll figure out something. If we have to, we dress you up in that Ponzi school jacket with the coat of arms, send you to the window. Excuse me, miss." I rolled over and punched him hard in the arm. "Fuck you," I said, stung by his drawling, snobbish rendering of my voice. "Can't be talking like that, Potter," said Boris gleefully, rubbing his arm. "They won't give you a fucking cent. All I'm saying is, I know where my dad's checkbook is, and if there's an emergency," he held out his open palms. "Right?" "Right. I mean, if I have to write bad check, I write bad check," said Boris philosophically. "Good to know I can. I'm not saying break in their room and go through all their things, but still, good idea to keep your eye open. Yes?" Boris and his father didn't celebrate Thanksgiving, and Sandra and my dad had reservations for a romantic holiday extravaganza at the French restaurant on the MGM Grand. "Do you want to come?" said my father when he saw me looking at the brochure on the kitchen counter, hearts and fireworks, tricolor bunting over a plate of roast turkey. "Or do you have something of your own to do?" "No, thanks." He was being nice, but the thought of being with Dad and Sandra on their romantic holiday whatever made me uneasy. "I've got plans." "What are you doing, then?" "I'm having Thanksgiving with somebody else." "With who?" said my dad, in a rare burst of parental solicitude. "A friend?" "Let me guess," said Sandra, barefoot, in the Miami Dolphins jersey she slept in, staring into the fridge. "The same person who keeps eating all these oranges and apples I bring home." "Oh, come on," said my dad sleepily, coming up behind her and putting his arms around her. "You like the little Rooski. What's his name? Boris?" "Sure, I like him, which is good, I guess, since he's here pretty much all the time. You know." Ever since Boris had shown up with a bruised eye, I had built Boris's father up in my mind to be some thick-necked Soviet with pig eyes and a buzz haircut. In fact, as I was surprised to see when I did finally meet him, he was as thin and as pale as a starved poet, chlorotic, with a sunken chest. He smoked incessantly, wore cheap shirts that had grayed in the wash, drank endless cups of sugary tea. But when you looked at him in the eye, you realized that his fatality was deceptive. He was wiry, intense, bad temper shimmering off him, small-boned and sharp-faced like Boris, but with an evil red-rimmed gaze and a tiny brownish saw teeth. He made me think of a rabid fox. I didn't actually meet him face-to-face until a few days before Thanksgiving. Then we walked into Boris's house one day after school, laughing and talking, to find him hunched at the kitchen table with a bottle and a glass. Despite his shabby clothes, he was wearing expensive shoes and lots of gold jewelry, and when he looked up at us with reddened eyes, we were shut up talking immediately. Though he was a small, slightly built-up man, there was something in his face that made you not want to get too close to him. "Hi," I said tentatively. "Hello," he said, stony-faced, and in a much thicker accent than Boris, and then turned to Boris and said something in Ukrainian. A brief conversation followed, which I observed with interest. It was interesting to see the change that came over Boris when he was speaking another language, a sort of livening or alertness, a sense of a different and more efficient person occupying his body. Then, unexpectedly, Mr. Pavlovsky held out both hands to me. "Thank you," he said thickly. Though I was afraid to approach him, it felt like approaching a wild animal. I stepped forward anyway and held out both my hands awkwardly. He took them in his own, which were hard-skinned and cold. "You are a good person," he said. His gaze was bloodshot and way too intense. I wanted to look away and was ashamed of myself. "God be with you and bless you always," he said. "You are like son to me, for letting my son come into your family." "My family?" In confusion, I glanced over at Boris. Mr. Pavlovsky's eyes went to him. "You told him what I said." "He said you are part of our family here," said Boris in a bored voice. "If there's anything he can ever do for you." To my great surprise, Mr. Pavlovsky pulled me close and caught me in a solid embrace. "What was that about?" I said quietly when we were up in Boris's room with the door shut. Boris rolled his eyes. "Believe me, you don't want to know. Is he that loaded all the time? How does he keep his job?" Boris cackled. "High official in the company," he said, "or something." We stayed up in Boris's murky, batik-draped room until we heard his dad's truck start up in the driveway. "He won't be back for a while," Boris said as I let the curtain fall back over the window. "He feels bad for leaving me so much alone. He knows it's a holiday coming up, and he asked if I could stay at your house." "Well, you do all the time anyway." "He knows that," said Boris, scraping the hair out of his eyes. "That's why he thanked you. But I hope you don't mind. I gave him your wrong address." "Why?" "Because he moved his legs to make room for me to sit by him, without me having to ask. I think maybe you don't want him rolling up drunk at your house in the middle of the night, waking your father and Sandra out of bed. Also, if he ever asks, he thinks your last name is Potter." "Why? It's better that way," said Boris calmly. "Trust me." Boris and I lay on the floor in front of the television at my house, eating potato chips and drinking vodka, watching the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. It was snowing in New York. A number of balloons had just passed. Snoopy, Ronald McDonald, SpongeBob, Mr. Peanut, and a troupe of Hawaiian dancers in loincloths and grass skirts was performing a number in Herald Square. "Glad that's not me," said Boris. "Bet they're freezing their arses off." "Yeah," I said, though I had no eyes for the balloons or the dancers or any of it. "Idiots. Can't believe they dress like that. They'll end up in hospital, those girls." As fiercely as Boris complained about the heat in Las Vegas, he also had an unshakable belief that anything cold made people ill. Unheated swimming pools, the air conditioning at my house, and even ice and drinks. He rolled over on his back and passed me the bottle. "You and your mother, you went to this parade?" "Nah. Why not?" said Boris, feeding Popper a potato chip. "The left turning," I said, a word which I had picked up from him, "and too many tourists." He lit a cigarette and offered me one. "Are you sad?" "A little," I said, leaning in to light it from his match. Then I must have blacked out, an all too typical occurrence when Boris brought a bottle over, because next I knew the light was completely different, and I was kneeling by the sliding doors with a puddle of puke on the carpet beside me and my forehead pressed to the glass. Boris was fast asleep, face down and snoring happily, one arm dangling off the sofa. Popchick was sleeping too, chin resting contently on the back of Boris's head. My apprehension about Boris's father had been eased somewhat since he had taken my hands and thanked me for looking after Boris. Though Mr. Pavlovsky, "Mister," cackled Boris, was a scary-looking guy, all right. I'd come to think he wasn't quite as awful as he seemed. Twice the week after Thanksgiving, we came in after school to find him in the kitchen, mumbled pleasantries, nothing more, as he sat at the table throwing back vodka and blotting his damp forehead with a paper napkin, his fairish dark hair darkened with some sort of oily hair cream, listening to loud Russian news on his beat-up radio. But then one night we were downstairs with Popper, who had walked over from my house, and watching an old Peter Lorre movie called The Beast with Five Fingers when the front door slammed, hard. Boris slapped his forehead. "Fuck!" Before I realized what he was doing, he shoved Popper in my arms, seized me by the collar of my shirt, and hauled me up and pushed me on the back. "What?" He flung out a hand. "Just go! Dog!" he hissed. "My dad will kill him. Hurry!" I ran through the kitchen and as quietly as I could slipped out the back door. It was very dark outside. For once in his life, Popper didn't make a sound. I put him down, knowing he would stick close, and circled around to the living room windows, which were uncurtained. His dad was walking in with a cane, something I'd never seen. Leaning on it heavily, he limped into the bright room like a character in a stage play. Boris stood, arms crossed over his scrawny chest, hugging himself. He and his father were arguing, or rather, his father was talking to him angrily. Boris stared at the floor. His hair hung in his face, so all I could see of him was the tip of his nose. Abruptly, tossing his head, Boris did something sharp and turned to leave. Then, so viciously, I almost didn't have time to register it, Boris's dad snapped out like a snake with the cane and whacked Boris across the back of the shoulders and knocked him to the ground. Before he could get up, he was on his hands and knees. I've been saying Pavlovsky. It's Pavlikovsky. God. Mr. Pavlikovsky kicked him down and then caught him by the back of the shirt and pulled him, stumbling to his feet. Ranting and screaming in Russian, he slapped him across the face with his red, deranged hand, backwards and forwards. Then, throwing him staggering out into the middle of the room, he brought up the hooked end of his cane and cracked him square across the face. Half in shock, I backed away from the window, so disoriented that I tripped and fell over a sack of garbage. Popper, alarmed at the noise, was running back and forth and crying in a high, keening tone. Just as I was clambering up again, panic-stricken, in a crash of cans and beer bottles, the door flew open and a square of yellow light spilled onto the concrete. As quickly as I could, I scrambled to my feet, snatched up Popper, and ran. But it was only Boris. He caught up with me, grabbed me by the arm, and dragged me down the street. Jesus, I said, lagging a little, trying to look back. What was that? Behind us, the front door of Boris's house flew open. Mr. Pavlikovsky stood silhouetted in the light of the doorway and bracing himself with one hand, shaking his fists and shouting in Russian. Boris pulled me along. Come on. Down the dark street we ran, shoes slapping the asphalt, until at last his father's voice died away. Fuck, I said, slowing to a walk as we rounded the corner. My heart was pounding and my heart swam. Popper was whining and struggling to get down, and I set him on the asphalt to dash in circles around us. What happened? What happened? Ah, nothing, said Boris, sounding unaccountably cheerful, wiping his nose with a wet, snuffling noise. Storm in a glass of water is how we say it in Polish. He was just pissed. I bent over, hands on knees, to catch my breath. Pissed angry or pissed drunk? Both. Well, he didn't see Pop Chick, though. Or I don't know what. He thinks animals are for outside. Here, he said, holding up the vodka bottle. Look what I got. Nicked it on the way out. I smelled the blood on him before I saw it. There was a crescent moon, not much, but enough to see by, and when I stood and looked at him head on, I realized that his nose was pouring and his shirt was dark with it. Gosh, I said, still breathing hard. Are you all right? Let's go to the playground, catch our breath, said Boris. His face, I saw, was a mess, swollen eye and an ugly hook-shaped cut in his forehead that was also pouring blood. Boris, we should go home. He raised an eyebrow. Home? My house, whatever. You look bad. He grinned, exposing bloody teeth, and elbowed me in the ribs. Yeah, I need a drink before I face Sandra. Come on, Potter. Couldn't you use a wind me down after all that? At the abandoned community center, the playground slides gleamed silver in the moonlight. We sat on the side of the empty fountain, our feet dangling in the dry basin, and passed the bottle back and forth until we began to lose track of time. That was the weirdest thing I've ever seen, I said, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. The stars were spinning a bit. Boris, leaning back on his hands, face turned to the sky, was singing to himself in Polish. He's fucking scary, I said. Your dad. Yeah, said Boris cheerfully, wiping his mouth on the shoulder of his blood-stained shirt. Boris, who'd been fumbling to get a cigarette lit, let out a smoky sigh. Want one? He passed it to me and lit another for himself, then brushed his jaw with his knuckles. Ah, he said, working it back and forth. Does it hurt? Sleepily, he laughed and punched me in the shoulder. What do you think, idiot? Before long, we were staggering with laughter, blundering around on the gravel on hands and knees. Drunk as I was, my mind felt high and cold and strangely clear. Then at some point, dusty from rolling and scuffling on the ground, we were reeling home in almost total blackness, rows of abandoned houses in the desert night, gigantic all around us, bright crackle of stars above, and Pop Chick trotting behind us as we weaved side to side, laughing so hard we were gagging and heaving and nearly sick by the side of the road. He was singing at the top of his lungs, the same tune as before. When we got to my house, making way too much noise, shushing each other, the garage was empty, no one home. Thank God, said Boris fervently, falling to the concrete to prostrate himself before the Lord. I caught him by the collar of his shirt. Get up! Inside, under the lights, he was a mess, blood everywhere, eyes swollen to a glossy slit. Hang on, I said, dropping him in the center of the living room carpet and wobbling to the bathroom to get something for his cut. But there wasn't anything except shampoo and a bottle of green perfume that Sandra had won at some giveaway at the Wynn. Drunkenly remembering something my mother had said, that perfume was an antiseptic in a pinch, I went back to the living room where Boris was sprawled on the carpet with Popper sniffing anxiously at his blood-stained shirt. Here, I said, pushing the dog aside, dabbing the bloody place on his forehead with a damp cloth. Hold still. Boris twitched away and growled. "The fuck are you doing?" "Shut up," I said, holding the hair back from his eyes. He muttered something in Russian. I was trying to be careful, but I was as drunk as he was, and when I sprayed perfume on the cut, he shrieked and socked me in the mouth. "What the fuck?" I said, touching my lip, my fingers coming away bloody. "Look what you did to me." "Lie it," he said, coughing and batting the air. "It stinks. What'd you put on me, you whore?" I started laughing. I couldn't help it. "Bastard," he roared, shoving me so hard I fell, but he was laughing too. He held out a hand to help me up, but I kicked it away. "Fuck off." I was laughing so hard I could barely get the words out. "You smell like Sandra." Christ, I'm choking. I've got to get this off me. We stumbled outside, shedding our clothes, hopping one-legged out of our pants as we went, and jumped into the pool. Bad idea, I realized in the toppling over moment before I hit the water, blind, drunk, and too wrecked to walk. The cold water slammed into me so hard it almost knocked my breath out. I clawed to the surface, eyes stinging, chlorine burning my nose. A spray of water hit me in the eyes, and I spit it back at him. He was a white blur in the dark, cheeks hollow, and black hair plastered on either side of his head. Laughing, we grappled and ducked each other, even though my teeth were chattering and I felt way too drunk and sick to be horsing around in 8 feet of water. Boris dove. A hand clamped my ankle and yanked me under, and I found myself staring into a dark wall of bubbles. Choking for breath, I clung to the edge of the pool and gasped. When my vision cleared, I saw Boris, coughing, cursing, plunging towards the steps. Breathless with anger, I half swam, half hopped up behind him and hooked a foot around his ankle so that he fell face forward with a smack. "Asshole," I sputtered when he floundered to the surface. He was trying to talk, but I struck a sheet of water in his face, and then another, and wound my fingers in his hair and pushed him under. "You miserable shit," I screamed when he surfaced, heaving, water streaming down his face. "Don't ever do that to me again." I held both hands on his shoulders and was about to dive on top of him, push him down, hold him for a good long time, when he reached around and clasped my arm, and I saw that he was white and trembling. "Stop," he said, gasping, and then I realized how unfocused and strange his eyes were. "Hey," I said, "are you okay?" But he was coughing too hard to answer. His nose was bleeding again, blood gushing dark between his fingers. I helped him up, and together we collapsed on the pool steps, half in, half out of the water, too exhausted to even climb the way out. Bright sun woke me. We were in my bed, wet hair, half-dressed and shivering in the air-conditioned cold, with Popper snoring between us. The sheets were damp and reeking of chlorine. I had a shattering headache and an ugly metallic taste in my mouth, like I had been sucking on a handful of pocket change. I lay very still, feeling I might vomit if I moved my head even a quarter of an inch, then very carefully sat up. "Boris?" I said, rubbing my cheek with the flat of my hand. Brown streaks of dried blood were smeared on the pillowcase. "You awake?" "Oh, God," groaned Boris, dead pale and sticky with sweat, rolling on his stomach to clutch at the mattress. He was naked except for his Sid Vicious bracelets and what looked like a pair of my underwear. We're gonna come back to this. Gonna put a pin on this as well, okay? Put a pin on that. We'll return. I think you know what we're getting at. If you know nothing about this book, you have not read this book, you have not been on the Tumblr, I think you know what may have happened here. I told you this shit was canon, okay? We're getting there. I told you it was. We're going, okay? Let's move forward. "Not here," I kicked him. Up. Muttering, he stumbled off. I could hear him puking in my bathroom. The sound made me sick, but also a bit hysterical. I rolled over and laughed into my pillow. When he stumbled back in, clasping his head, I was shocked at his black eye. The blood caked at his nostrils and the scab cut on his forehead. "Christ," I said, "that looks bad. You need stitches." "You know what?" said Boris, throwing himself stomach down on the mattress. "What?" "We're late for fucking school." We rolled on our backs and roared with laughter. As weak and nauseated as I felt, I thought I would never be able to stop. Boris flopped over, groping with one arm for something on the floor. In an instant, his head popped back up. "Ah, what's this?" I sat up and reached eagerly for the glass of water, or what I thought was water, and then when he shoved it under my nose, gagged at the smell. Quick as a flash, he was on top of me, all sharp bones and clammy flesh, reeking of sweat and sick and something else, raw and dirty like stagnant pond water. Sharply, he pinched my cheek, tipping the glass of vodka over my face. "Time for your medicine, now," he said as I knocked the glass flying and hit him in the mouth, a glancing blow that didn't quite connect. Popper was barking with excitement. Boris got me in a chokehold, grabbed my dirty shirt from the day before, and tried to stuff it in my mouth, but I was too quick for him and flipped him off the bed so that his head knocked against the wall. "Ow, fuck," he said, rubbing his face sleepily with his open palm and chuckling. Still shivering with sick, I drank from my hands at the sink and splashed some water on my face. My bare-chested reflection was hunched and pale, and I had a fat lip from where Boris had socked me the night before. Boris was still on the floor, lying bonelessly with his head propped against the wall. When I came back, he cracked his good eye open and chortled at the sight of me. All better? Fuck you, don't fucking talk to me. Serves you right. Didn't I tell you not to faff around with that glass? Me? You don't remember, do you? He touched his tongue to his upper lip to see if his mouth had started bleeding again. When his shirt was off, you could see all the spaces between his ribs, marks from old beatings, and the heat flushed high in his chest. The glass on the floor. Very bad idea. Unlucky. I told you not to leave it there. Huge jinx on us. You didn't have to pour it on my head, I said, fumbling for my specs and reaching for the first pair of pants I saw from the communal heap of dirty laundry on the floor. They share clothes! That's cute! This whole video is just gonna be me screaming about how cute they are. Cause they're damaged, but it's wholesome and, we've been there. Boris pinched the bridge of his nose and laughed. Was just trying to help you. A little booze will make you feel better. Yeah, thanks a lot. It's true, if you can keep it down, will make your headache go like magic. My dad is not a helpful person, but this is one very helpful thing he has told me. Nice cold beer is the best, if you have it. Say, come here, I said. I was standing by the window, looking down at the pool. Eh? Just come look. I want you to see this. Just tell me, muttered Boris from the floor. I don't want to get up. You'd better. Downstairs it looked like a murder scene. A line of blood drips wound around the paving stones of the pool. Shoes, jeans, blood-soaked shirt were righteously flung and tossed. One of Boris's busted-up boots lay at the bottom of the deep end. Later, after a few half-hearted passes with the pool vacuum, we were sitting on the kitchen counter smoking my dad's Viceroys and talking. It was almost noon, too late to even think about going to school. Boris, ragged and unhinged looking, his shirt hanging off the shoulder on one side, slamming the cabinets, complaining bitterly because there was no tea. He had made some hideous coffee in the Russian way, by boiling grounds in a pan on the stove. No, he said when he saw I'd poured myself a normal-sized cup. Very strong, very small amount. I tasted it, made a face. He dipped a finger in it and licked it off. Biscuit would be nice. You've got to be kidding. Bread and butter? He said hopefully. Crazy, I said, looking at his face. What? That your dad did that? It is nothing, mumbled Boris, turning his head sideways so he could wedge the whole corn chip in. He broke one of my ribs once. After a long pause, and because I couldn't think of anything else to say, I said, a broken rib's not that serious. No, but I hurt this one, he said, pulling up his shirt and pointing it out to me. I thought he was going to kill you. He bumped his shoulder against mine. Oh, I provoked him on purpose, answered back, so you could get Popchick out of there. Look, it's fine, he said condescendingly when I kept looking at him. Last night he was frothing at mouth, but he'll be sorry when he sees me. Maybe you ought to stay here for a while. Boris leaned back on his hands and gave me a dismissive smile. It's nothing to be fussed about. He gets depressed sometimes is all. Boris laughed, and with what seemed like genuine amusement. And what, you don't get sad yourself sometimes? He should be in jail for doing that. Oh, please. Boris had gotten bored with his bad coffee and had ventured to the fridge for a beer. What are you going to tell them at school? He cracked the beer open. Well, the bruise on his face was the color of raw meat. People are going to ask. He grinned and elbowed me. I'll tell him you did it, he said. No, seriously. I am serious. Boris, it's not funny. Oh, come on. Football, skateboard. His black hair fell in his face like a shadow, and he tossed it back. You don't want them to take me away, do you? Right, I said, after an uncomfortable pause. My head hurt. Boris's clothes, my clothes actually, tumbled in the dryer. Outside, the sun shone bright and mean. I don't know about you, I said, taking the cigarette back, but I could use some real food. Okay, we're getting there. Sometimes in the night, I woke up wailing. Happily, Boris never seemed annoyed or even startled when I woke him, as if he came from a world where there was nothing so unusual in a nocturnal howl of pain. Sometimes he'd gather up Popchick, snoring at the foot of our bed, and deposit him in a limp, sleepy heap on my chest, and weighed down like that, the warmth of both of them around me, I lay counting to myself in Spanish, or trying to remember all the words I knew in Russian, swear words mostly, until I went back to sleep. Boris was the only person I told in Vegas how my mother had died, information that to his credit he'd accepted with aplomb. His own life had been so erratic and violent that he didn't seem all that shocked by the story. Boris had grown to like my father, and vice versa. He understood better than I did how my father made his living, and although he knew without being told to stay away from my dad when he was losing, he also understood that my father was in need of something I was unwilling to give, namely an audience and the flush of winning when he was pacing around jacked up and punchy in the kitchen and wanting someone to listen to his stories and praise him about how well he'd done. You didn't tell me that your dad had been in movies, said Boris, returning upstairs with a cup of now cold tea. He wasn't in many, like 2. But that was a really big movie, that police movie. You know, the one about policemen taking bribes. What was the name of it? He didn't have a very big part. He was in it for like 1 second. He played a lawyer who got shot in the street. Boris shrugged. Who cares? Still is interesting. If he ever went to Ukraine, people would treat him like a star. He can go then and take Sandra with him. Boris's enthusiasm for what he called intellectual talks found an appreciative outlet in my father as well. Uninterested in politics myself, and even less interested in my father's views on them, I was unwilling to engage in the kind of pointless argument on world events that I knew my father enjoyed. But Boris, drunk or sober, was glad to oblige. Often in these talks, my father would wave his arms around and mimic Boris's accent for entire conversations in a way that set my teeth on edge. But Boris himself didn't appear to notice or mind. Sometimes, when he went down to put the kettle on and didn't return, I found him arguing happily in the kitchen like a pair of actors in a stage production about the dissolution of the Soviet Union or whatever. "Ah, Potter," he said, coming upstairs. "Your dad, such a nice guy." I removed the earbuds of my iPod. "If you say so." "I mean it," said Boris, flopping down on the floor. "He's so talkative and intelligent. And why is he so terrible? Because he saw other women?" said Boris, holding up his hands, palms up. "It happens. He has his life. What has that to do with you?" I shook my head in disbelief. "Man," I said, "he's got you snowed." It never failed to amaze me how my dad could charm strangers and reel them in. Boris looped his arms around his knees and leaned his head back against the wall. "All right, Potter," he said agreeably. "Your enemy, my enemy. If you hate him, I hate him too. But," he put his head to the side, "here I am, staying in his house. What should I do? Should I talk, be friendly and nice, or disrespect him? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying don't believe everything he tells you." Boris chuckled. "I don't believe everything that anybody tells me," he said, kicking my foot companionably. "Not even you." That's cute! As fond as my dad was of Boris, I was constantly trying to divert his attention from the fact that Boris had basically moved into his house with us, which wasn't that difficult, as between the gamblings and the drugs, my dad was so distracted that he might not have noticed if I brought him a bobcat to live in the upstairs bedroom. Sandra was a bit tougher to negotiate, more prone to complain about the expense, despite the supply of stolen snack food Boris contributed to the household. When she was at home, he stayed upstairs and out of the way, frowning over the Idiot in Russian and listening to music on my portable speakers. I brought him beers and food from downstairs and learned to make his tea the way he liked it, boiling hot with 3 sugars. That's so domestic! Like, he knows how he likes his tea and he makes him tea! Fuck! In the surprised silence that followed, a champagne cork popped in the kitchen, a burst of laughter. It was just past midnight, 2 minutes into Christmas Day. Then my father leaned back in his chair and laughed. "Merry Christmas," he roared, producing from his pocket a jewelry box, which he slid over to Sandra, and 2 stacks of 20s, $500 each, which he tossed across the table to Boris and me. And though in the clockless, temperature-controlled casino night, words like day and Christmas were fairly meaningless constructs, happiness, amidst the loudly clinked glasses, didn't seem quite such a doomed or fatal idea. Oh, how I wish the book could just end there, and Theo didn't have a life of turmoil and depression and distress, but we're continuing. Okay, so a year has gone by now in these next sections, and I'm going to read. It's the next fall, winter, after that Christmas. Winter or summer, the days were dazzling, the desert air burned our nostrils and scraped our throats dry. Everything was funny, everything made us laugh. Sometimes, just before sundown, just as the blue of the sky began darkening to violet, we were so attuned to each other that we didn't need to talk at all if we didn't want to. We knew how to tip each other over in hysterics with an arch of an eyebrow or a quirk of the mouth. Nights, we ate cross-legged on the floor, leaving greasy fingerprints on our school books. Our diets had made us malnourished, with soft brown bruises on our arms and legs. Vitamin deficiency, said the nurse at school, who gave us each a painful shot in the ass and a colorful jar of children's chewables. "My bottom hurts," said Boris, rubbing his rear end and cursing the metal seats on the school bus. I was freckled head to toe from all the swimming we did. My hair, longer than it's ever been again, got light streaks from the pool chemicals, and basically I felt good, though I still had a heaviness in my chest that never went away, and my teeth were rotting out the back from all the candy we ate. Apart from that, I was fine, and so the time passed happily enough. But then, shortly after my 15th birthday, Boris met a girl named Kotku, and everything changed. So I'm not going to torture you guys with the many pages that continue of Theo complaining about Boris's girlfriend, because Theo is a jealous bitch who's in love with Boris. As you, like we haven't gotten to the dead giveaway yet, but, I think it's pretty obvious that he's in love with Boris. But I'm going to pause here because I'm going to go back to what I want to talk about. Something that Theo definitely faces is internalized homophobia, much like, I'll give you a second to guess, you guessed it, Eddie Kasprak. Now, I say that, but there are a lot of people on the internet that are saying that, oh my god, the goldfinch is like an AU Ready fic. No, it's not. Reddy is very, wholesome and good-natured and happy and fine. This relationship developed of drug use and alcoholism and abuse from parents and death and lots of bad things. Like, they are each other's safe haven. They're very different. I only make that comparison because I think that that'll help you guys understand kind of what I'm saying by internalized homophobia, because I've done so many things on Reddit, and you guys know, like, all my thoughts and opinions on Reddit. Theo faces a lot of internalized homophobia, where he kind of doesn't, like, he's clearly in love with Boris, and he kind of doesn't want to face the fact that he is possibly attracted to a boy. So, this is the first thing that I had marked in this book, and it's when he is leaving New York, and he is saying goodbye to the doormen in his apartment where he lived with his mother. He was he was friends with these doormen, he saw them every day, they were very friendly, they were pals, whatever. "Anito, you taking off?" he said, leaning down and sticking his head at the window of the cab. "You gotta send us a picture for downstairs." Down in the basement, where the doormen changed into their uniforms, there was a wallpaper with postcards and Polaroids from Miami and Cancun, Puerto Rico and Portugal, which tenants and doormen had sent home to East 57th Street over the years. "That's right," said Goldie. "Send us a picture. Don't forget. I was going to miss them, but it seemed gay to come out and say so. So all I said was, okay, take it easy." This boy, at 13 years old, thinks that it is gay to show affection to his male friends. And I want y'all to pin that, keep that in the back of your mind, because I think that that explains Theo's mindset later in the story. That it's an internalized thing. Like, he has problems with that in himself. So, like I said, pin that, keep that in the back of your mind, because I think that that will give some explanation to some things that happen later. "What do you think?" "Well, I mean, what did he want me to say?" "She likes you, sure." He shifted restlessly. "We were outside by the pool, though it was too windy and cold to swim." "No, really, what do you think about her? Tell the truth, Potter," he said when I hesitated. "I don't know," I said doubtfully, and then, when he still sat looking at me, "Honestly, I don't know, Boris. She seems kind of desperate." He's a really jealous bitch. Like, I just marked that part specifically, but, like, the next at least 20, 30 pages or so are just him being jealous and vengeful and being like, "Boris's girlfriend Nick, he won't hang out with me anymore because he's with his girlfriend." And it's really obvious. Whole months passed where the wind never stopped, blown sand rattling against the windows, the surface of the swimming pool wrinkled and sinister looking, strong tea in the mornings, stolen chocolate, Boris yanking my hair by the handful and kicking me in the ribs. "Wake up, Potter, rise and shine." I told myself I didn't miss him, but I did. I got stoned alone, watching Adult Access and the Playboy Channel, reading Red Grapes of Wrath and The House of the Seven Gables, which seemed as if they had to be tied for the most boring book ever written, and for what felt like thousands of hours, time enough to learn Danish or play a guitar if I had been trying, fooled around in the street with a fucked-up skateboard Boris and I had found in one of the foreclosed houses down the block. But still, I was lonely. It was Boris I missed, the whole impulsive mess of him, gloomy, reckless, hot-tempered, appallingly thoughtless, Boris pale and pasty, with his shoplifted apples and his Russian language novels, gnawed-down fingernails, and shoelaces dragging in the dust. Boris, budding alcoholic, fluent cursor in 4 languages, who snatched food from my plate when he felt like it, and nodded off drunk on the floor, face red like he'd been slapped, even when he took things without asking, as he all too frequently did. Little things were always disappearing. DVDs and school supplies from my locker. More than once I'd caught him going through my pockets for money. His own possessions meant so little to him that somehow it wasn't stealing. Whenever he came into cash himself, he'd split it with me down the middle, and anything that belonged to him he gave to me gladly if I asked for it, and sometimes when I didn't, as when Mr. Pavlikovsky's gold lighter, which I admired in passing, turned up on the outside pocket of my backpack. And this is it. Here we've reached the part that I have strong words about. Let's go, shall we? The funny thing, I'd worried, if anything, that Boris was the one who was a little too affectionate, if affectionate was the right word. The first time he turned in bed and draped an arm over my waist, I lay there half asleep for a moment, not knowing what to do, staring at my old socks on the floor, empty beer bottles, my paperbacked copy of The Red Badge of Courage. At last, embarrassed, I faked a yawn and tried to roll away, but instead he sighed and pulled me closer, with a sleepy, snuggling motion. "Shh, Potter," he whispered into the back of my neck. "It's only me." It was weird. Was it weird? It was, and it wasn't. I'd fallen back to sleep shortly after, lulled by his bitter, beery, unwashed smell and his breath easily in my ear. I was aware I couldn't explain it without making it sound like more than it was. On nights when I woke, strangled with fear, there he was, catching me when I stared up terrified from the bed. When I started up terrified from the bed, pulling me back down in the covers beside him, muttering in nonsense Polish, his voice throaty and strange with sleep. We'd drowse off in each other's arms, listening to music from my iPod, Thelonious Monk, The Velvet Underground, music my mother had liked, and sometimes wait clutching each other like castaways or much younger children. And yet, this was the murky part. This was what bothered me. There had also been other, way more confusing and fucked up nights, grappling around half-dressed, weak light sliding in from the bathroom and everything haloed and unstable without my glasses, hands on each other, rough and fast, kicked over beers foaming on my carpet. Fun and not that big of a deal when it was actually happening. More than worth it for the sharp gasp when my eyes rolled back and I forgot about everything. But when we woke the next morning, stomach down and groaning on opposite sides of the bed, it receded into an incoherence of black-lit flickers, choppy and poorly lit like some experimental film. The unfamiliar twist of Boris's features fading from my memory already, and none of it with any more bearing on our actual lives than a dream. We never spoke of it. It wasn't quite real. Getting ready for school, we threw shoes, splashed water at each other, chewed aspirin for our hangovers, laughed and joked around all the way to the bus stop. I knew people would think the wrong thing if they knew. I didn't want anyone to find out, and I knew Boris didn't either, but all the same, he seemed so completely untroubled by it that I was fairly sure it was just a laugh, nothing to take too seriously or get worked up about. And yet, more than once, I had wondered if I should step up my nerve and say something, draw some kind of line, make things clear, just to make absolutely sure he didn't have the wrong idea. But the moment had never come, but there was no point in speaking up and being awkward about the whole thing, though I scarcely took comfort in the fact. Bitch! They were sleeping together! Okay? Like, shit. Okay. Shit. So, obviously that's like... Okay, so here's where I want to chat, right? Here's where I want to chat. This goes back to me saying that, like, okay, at this point they are 15 and 16. They are not children, right? Like, they can think for themselves. Yes, they were drunk a lot of the times. They were on drugs. But I'm gonna freaking put this down because I want to speak on this matter. So, there are people out there who we haven't even gotten to the second, but this is just the first this is just the first bit, okay? This is the first serious bit. We haven't even gotten the second one yet. You probably know what it is because you saw the trailer, but there are people who have the audacity to argue that their relationship was platonic. Listen, I get it. Like, I get what people are coming from, where they're like, oh, like, they're just boys being boys. They didn't have girlfriends. Whatever. Like, that's fucking gay. They were sleeping together. Like, nobody does that. No 16-year-old straight male is like, yeah, I'm just gonna have sex with my best friend. No homo, though. No one does that. Nobody does that. Like, you gotta see where I'm coming from, right? Also, I don't know what else, like, they were sleeping, what the fuck what else do you want me to say? Like, they're in love, it's fine, whatever. Opinion, I don't think that that's gonna be in the movie at all. Because I've heard rumors that the director thinks that their relationship was platonic, which I could make a whole video about how angry that makes me, but this is kind of that video, because I'm giving you the evidence right here. Like, nobody fucking does that! That's gay! Jesus Christ! Like, oh my god. I hated how much I missed him. There was a lot of drinkings going on in my house, on Sandra's end anyways, a lot of slammed doors. Well, if it wasn't me, it had to be you, I heard her yelling, and without Boris there, they were both more constrained with Boris in the house. It was harder. Apart from school, I'd hardly seen Boris, except for a Saturday afternoon trip when my dad had taken us into the Carnegie Deli at the Mirage for Sable and Billy's. But then, a few weeks before Thanksgiving, he came thumping upstairs when I wasn't expecting him and said, "Your dad has been having a bad run, did you know that?" I put down Solace Marner, which we were reading for school. "What?" "Well, he's been playing at $200 tables, $200 a pop," he said. "You can lose 1,000 in 5 times easy. $1,000 is nothing for him," I said, and then, when Boris did not reply, "How much did he say he lost?" "Didn't say," said Boris, "but a lot." Only your dad sometimes is hard to tell between joking and serious. Then, watching me carefully, what are you thinking? Nothing. He knows we talk. That's why he told me. He wouldn't tell me if he didn't want you to know. Yeah, I was fairly sure that wasn't the case. There were a couple half-melted peppermints from my dad's pocket on the coffee table, along with some receipts and change, and I unwrapped one and put it in my mouth. I was as high as a paratrooper, and the sweetness tingled all through me, like fire. Ruffled her? I said, the candy clicking loudly against my teeth. Come again? Like this, he said, making a tousling motion with his hand as he took one last hit off the joint and stubbed it out. Don't know the word. I wouldn't worry about it, I said, rolling my head back against the couch. Say, you ought to try one of these peppermints. They taste really great. Boris scrubbed a hand down his face, and then shook his head like a dog, throwing off water. Wow, he said, running both hands through his tangled-up hair. Yeah, me too, I said after a vibrating pause. My thoughts were stretched out and viscid, slow to wave the surface. What? I'm fucked up. Oh yeah? He laughed. How fucked up? Pretty far up there, pal. The peppermint on my tongue felt intense and huge, like the size of a boulder, like I could hardly talk with it in my mouth. A peaceful silence followed. It was about 5:30 in the afternoon, but the light was still pure and stark. Wow, I said, in a voice that I guess must have sounded sadder than I'd intended, from the way that Boris brought his eyebrows together and looked at me. Well, I said, when he kept on staring at me, what is it? He blinked and shook his head. No, I can just see it. The mist of sadness, sort of, around your head. It's like you're a soldier or something, a person from history, walking on a battlefield maybe, with all these deep feelings. Boris, you're still completely fried. Not really, he said dreamily. I sort of snap in and out of it, but I still see colored sparks coming off things if I look from the corner of my eye just right. He told me you had a fortune, said Boris later that night at the playground, when we were sitting around waiting for the drugs to work. I slightly wished we had picked another night to take them, but Boris had insisted it would make me feel better. You believed I had a fortune and wouldn't tell you? We'd been sitting on the swings for what seemed like forever, waiting for just what, I didn't know. Boris shrugged. I don't know. There are lots of things you don't tell me. I would have told you. It's all right, though. I don't know what to do. It was very subtle. I had begun to notice glittering gray kaleidoscope patterns turning sluggishly in the gravel by my feet. Dirty ice, diamonds, sparkles of broken glass. Things were getting scary. Boris nudged me. There's something I didn't tell you either, Potter. What? My dad has to leave for his job. He's going back to Australia in a few months, then on, I think, to Russia. There was a silence that maybe lasted 5 seconds, but felt like it lasted an hour. Boris? Gone? Everything seemed frozen, like the planet had stopped. Well, I'm not going, said Boris serenely. His face in the moonlight had taken on an unnerving, electrified flicker, like a black and white film from the silent era. Fuck that, I'm running away. Where? Dunno. Do you want to come? Yes, I said, without thinking. When he said this, I began to laugh uncontrollably, so hard I nearly fell off the swing because I knew then for sure he saw the same thing I did. More than that, we were creating it. Whatever the drug was making us see, we were constructing it together, and with that realization, the virtual reality simulator flipped into color. It happened for both of us at the same time. Pop! We looked at each other and just laughed. Everything was hysterically funny. Even the playground slide was smiling at us, and at some point, deep in the night, when we were climbing on the jungle gym and showers of sparks were flying out of our mouths, I had the epiphany that laughter was light, and light was laughter, that this was the secret of the universe. For hours, we watched the clouds rearrange themselves into intelligent patterns rolling in the dirt, believing it was seaweed, lay on our backs and sang Dear Prudence to the welcoming and appreciative stars. It was a fantastic night, one of the great nights of my life, actually, despite what happened later. Boris stayed over at my house, since I lived closer to the playground and he was, in his own favorite term for lowness, vigavano, which meant shit-faced, or in shit, or something of the sort. At any rate, too wrecked to go home on his own in the dark. And this was fortunate, as it meant I wasn't alone in the house at 3:30 the next afternoon when Mr. Silver stopped by. Though we barely slept and were a little shaky, everything still felt the tiniest bit magical and full of light. We were drinking orange juice and watching cartoons. Good idea, as it seemed to extend the hilarious technicolor mood of the evening. And bad idea, had just shared our second joint of the afternoon when the doorbell rang. Popchick, who'd been extremely on edge, had sensed that we were off-key somehow and had been barking at us like we were possessed. Went off immediately, almost as if he'd expected something of the sort. In an instant, it all came crashing back. Holy shit, I said. I'll go, said Boris immediately, tucking Popchick under his arm. Off he bopped, barefoot and shirtless, with an air of complete unconcern, but in what seemed like 1 second he was back again, looking ashen. When I came back into the living room, Boris was sitting quietly and staring at cartoons with the sound off, stroking Popper, who, despite his earlier upset, was now fast asleep in his lap. Ridiculous, he said shortly. He pronounced the word in such a way that it took me a moment to realize what he'd said. Right, I said. Told you he was a freak. Some period of time passed before I realized I was sitting there staring into space. Boris lifted Popchick and put him down on the sofa so gently he didn't wake. You want to get out of here for a while? God, I said, shaking my head suddenly. The impact of the visit had for whatever reason just hit me, a delayed reaction. Fuck, I wish my dad had been home, you know? I wish that guy would beat his ass. I really do. He deserves it. Boris kicked my ankle. His feet were black with dirt, and he also had black polish on his toenails, courtesy of Kotku. You know what I had to eat yesterday? He said sociably. 2 Nestle bars and a Pepsi. All candy bars for Boris were Nestle bars, just as all sodas were Pepsi. And you know what I had to eat today? He made a 0 with a thumb and forefinger. No. Me neither. That stuff makes you not hungry. Yeah, but I need to eat something. My stomach. He made a face. Do you want to go get pancakes? Yes, something. I don't care. Do you have money? I'll look around. Good. I think I have $5 maybe. While Boris was rummaging for shoes and a shirt, I splashed some water on my face, checked out my pupils and the bruise on my jaw, rebuttoned my shirt when I saw it was done up the wrong way, and then went to let Pop Chick out, throwing his tennis ball to him for a bit since he hadn't had a proper walk on the leash, and I know he felt cooped up. When we came back in, Boris, dressed now, was downstairs. We'd done a quick search of the living room and were laughing and joking around, pooling our quarters and dimes and trying to figure out where we wanted to go and the quickest way to get there, when all of a sudden we noticed that Sandra had come in the front door and was standing there with a funny look on her face. Both of us stopped talking immediately and went about our change sorting in silence. So this is when they find out that Theo's father has died in a car crash. He was drunk driving and he died. So now him and Boris and Sandra's friends, are all in the house. Boris had his arm over my shoulder. She doesn't know, does she? I knew he was talking about Mr. Silver. Should I? Where was he going? Sandra was asking Courtney and Janet, almost aggressively, as if she suspected them of withholding information. What was he doing all the way out there? It was strange to see her still in her work uniform, as she usually changed out of it the second she walked in the door. He didn't go to meet that guy like he was supposed to, whispered Boris. I know. Possibly he had intended to go to the sit-down with Mr. Silver, but as my mother and I had so often so fatally known him to do, he'd probably stopped at a bar somewhere for a quick belt or two, to steady his nerves as he always said. At some bleary point deep in the evening, Sandra weeping in Courtney's arms for the 20th time, "Oh my God, he's gone. I can't believe it." Boris pulled me aside and said, "Potter, I have to go." "No, don't, please. Kotku's going to be freaked out. I'm supposed to be at her mom's now. She hasn't seen me for like 48 hours. Look, tell her to come over if she wants. Tell her what's happened. It's going to completely suck if you have to leave right now." Sandra had grown sufficiently distracted with guests and grief that Boris was able to go upstairs to make a call in her bedroom, a room usually kept locked that Boris and I never saw. In about 10 minutes, he came skimming rapidly down the steps. "Kotku said to stay," he said, ducking in to sit beside me. "She told me to say she's sorry." "Wow," I said, coming close to tears, scrubbing my hand over my face so he wouldn't see how startled and touched I was. Sandra's shoes were off, but they decided to leave her dressed. "Do you want me to spend the night?" Courtney was asking Boris in a low voice. Boris, shamelessly, stretched and yawned. His shirt was riding up and his jeans hung so low that you could see he wasn't wearing any underwear. "Theo, I'm not gay, I just noticed these things, Decker." "Boris, I can't goof around," I said, pocketing the earrings and the charm bracelet. "If we're going, we need to leave now, before people start showing up." "What people?" said Boris skeptically, running his finger back and forth under his nose. "Believe me, it happens fast. Child services coming in and like that." I counted the cash, $1,321 plus change. There were much more chips, close to $5,000 worth, but might as well leave her those. "Half for you and half for me," I said as I began to count the cash into 2 even piles. "There's enough here for 2 tickets. Probably we're too late to catch the last flight, but we should go ahead and take a car to the airport." "She doesn't want me. She'll call them herself as soon as she realizes she's stuck with me." "Them? I don't understand. Who is this them?" "Boris, I'm a minor." I could feel my panic rising in an all too familiar way. Maybe the situation wasn't literally life or death, but it sure felt like it. House filling with smoke, exits closing off. "I don't know how it works in your country, but I don't have any family, no friends out here. Me, you have me. What are you going to do, adopt me?" I stood up. "Look, if you're coming, we need to hurry. Do you have your passport? You'll need it for the plane." Boris put his hands up in his Russian enough already gesture. "Wait, this is happening way too fast." I stopped, halfway up the door. "What the fuck is your problem, Boris?" "My problem? You wanted to run away. It was you who asked me to go with you last night. Where are you going? New York? Where else?" "I wants to go someplace warm," he said instantly. "California." "That's crazy. Who do we know?" "California," he crowed. "Where in California? What town?" "Who cares? It's a big state." "Fantastic. It'll be fun. We'll stay high all the time, read books, build campfires, sleep on the beach." I looked at him for a long, unbearable moment. His face was on fire, and his mouth was stained blackish from the red wine. "All right," I said, knowing full well I was stepping off the edge and into the major mistake of my life. Petty theft, the change cut, sidewalk nods and homelessness, the fuck-up from which I would never recover. He was gleeful. "The beach, then?" "Yes?" "And that was how you went wrong, this fast." "Wherever you want," I said, pushing the hair out of my eyes. I was dead exhausted. "But we need to go now, please." What, this minute? Yes, do you need to go home and get anything? Tonight? I'm not kidding, Boris. Arguing with him was making the panic rise again. I can't just sit around and wait. The painting was a problem. I wasn't sure how that was going to work, but once I got Boris out of the house, I could figure something out. Please, come on. Is state care that bad in America? Said Boris doubtfully. You make it seem like the cops. Are you coming with me? Yes or no? I need some time. He said, following after me. We can't leave now. Really, I swear. Wait a little while. Give me a day. One day. Honest, you can't leave tonight, he repeated when I said nothing. Trust me, you'll be sorry. I mean it. Come to my house. Wait till the morning to go. I can't wait, I said curtly, taking my half of the cash and heading back to my room. Potter, he followed after me. Yes? There is something important I have to tell you. Boris, I said, turning. What the motherfuck? What is it? I said as we stood and stared at each other. If you have something to say, go on and say it. I'm afraid it will make you mad. What is it? What have you done? Boris was silent, gnawing the side of his thumb. Well, what? He looked away. You need to stay, he said vaguely. You're making a mistake. Let me use your phone, I said, elbowing on my jacket. I need to call a car. He fished in his pocket and handed it to me. It was a disposable phone, the one he'd bought to keep tabs on Kotku. No, keep it, he said, holding his hands up when I tried to give it back to him after I made my call. Then he dug out the wad of money, his half of the take from Sandra, and tried to press it on me. Forget it, I said, glancing back anxiously at the house. I was afraid she might wake up again and come to the street looking for us. It's yours. No, you might need it. I don't want it, I said, sticking my hands in my pockets to keep him from forcing it on me. Anyway, you might need it yourself. Come on, Potter, I wish you wouldn't go this moment. He gestured down the street, at the rows of empty houses. If you won't come to my house, skip over there for a day or two. That brick house has furniture in it, even. I'll bring you food if you want. Boris, I realized, was looking up at the sky and humming to himself, a line from one of my mother's Velvet Underground songs. But if you closed the door, the night could last forever. What about you? I said, rubbing my eyes. Eh? He said, looking at me with a smile. What's up? Will I see you again? Maybe, he said, in the same cheerful tone I imagined him using with Bommy and Judy, the barkeeper's wife, and Carmy Wallig and everyone else in his life he'd ever said goodbye to. Who knows? Will you meet me in a day or two? Well, join me later. Take a plane. You have the money. I'll call you and tell you where I am. Don't say no. Okay, then, said Boris, in the same cheerful voice. I won't say no. We went back and forth a few times until I began to feel much more optimistic about the future and things in general, and as we stood rubbing our noses, jabbering in the street, Papa looking up at us curiously, the wonderfulness of New York seemed right on the tip of my tongue, an evanescence possibly to convey. I mean, it's great, I said. The words were spiraling and tumbling out of me. Really, you have to come. We can go to Brighton Beach. That's where all the Russians hang out. Well, I've never been there, but the train goes there. It's the last stop on the line. There's a big Russian community, restaurants with smoked fish and sturgeon roe. My mother and I always talked about going in there to eat one day. This jeweler she worked with told me all the good places to go, and we never did. It's supposed to be great. Also, I have money for school. You can go to my school. No, you totally can't. I have a scholarship. Well, I did. But the guy said as long as the money in my fund was used for education, it could be used for anybody's education, not just mine. There's more than enough for both of us. Though, public school. The public schools are good in New York. I know people there. Public school's fine with me. I was still babbling when Boris said, Potter. Before I could answer him, he put both hands on my face and kissed me on the mouth. And while I stood blinking, it was over almost before I knew what had happened. He picked up Popper under the forelegs and kissed him too, in midair, smack on the tip of his nose. Then he handed him to me. Your car's over there, he said, giving him one last ruffle on the head. And sure enough, when I turned, a town car was creeping up on the other side of the street, surveying the addresses. We stood looking at each other, me breathing hard, completely stunned. Good luck, said Boris. I won't forget you. Then he patted Popper on the head. Bye, Popchick. Look after him, will you? He said to me. Later in the cab, and afterward, I would replay that moment and marvel that I'd waved and walked away quite so casually. Why hadn't I grabbed his arm and begged him one last time to get in the car? Come on, fuck it, Boris. Just like skipping school. We'll be eating breakfast over cornfields when the sun comes up. I knew him well enough to know that if you asked him the right way, at the right moment, he would do almost anything. And in the very act of turning away, I knew he would have run after me and hopped in the car laughing if I'd asked him one last time. But I didn't, and in truth it was maybe better that I didn't. I say that now, though it was something I regretted bitterly for a while. More than anything, I was relieved that in my unfamiliar babbling and wanting to talk state, I'd stopped myself from blurting the thing on the edge of my tongue, the thing I'd never said, even though it was something we both knew well enough without me saying it out loud to him in the street, which was, of course, I love you. I want to fucking die. Platonic my ass, okay? Bitch. I could stop there. Video over. There's the proof. There's everything. But that's not everything that happened. So we're going to continue on, even though I'm pretty sure I already have 2 hours worth of footage. What did you say your name was? Theo, I said without thinking, and immediately was sorry. All right, Theo, JP. He reached across the back seat to shake my hand. You want to take my advice about something? Sure, I said, quailing a bit. Even with everything else that was going on, and there was quite a lot, I felt incredibly uncomfortable that this guy had probably seen Boris kissing me in the street. Boris had not returned any of my texts, which was perhaps understandable since I was sending them to Kotku's phone, but I sent another one anyway. Buffalo, New York City tonight. Hope you're okay. Have you heard from X? Out of habit, I checked my phone for text for what seemed like the 10,000th time, and was cheered despite myself to find at long last a message, number I didn't recognize, but it had to be Boris. Hey, hope you two are okay, not too mad. Ring Sandra, okay? She has been bugging me. You let the dog out. He's run off. I can't find him anywhere. He probably got hit by a car or something. No, I was gazing fixedly at the blackness of the brick courtyard. It was raining, drops pounding hard on the window panes, the first real rain I'd seen in almost 2 years. He is with me. Oh, she sounded relieved, then more sharply. Where are you? With Boris somewhere? No. I spoke to him, wired out of his mind, it sounded like. He wouldn't tell me where you were. I know he knows. Now, tell me, eyeing my wrecked plate, spilled tea, and soggy toast, what can I bring you for breakfast? Caught between sneezes, I gave a bright Russian-accented shrug I picked up from Boris. Anything. While I was lying there worrying, my cell phone beeped. Guess where I am? Pool at MGM Grand. I blinked. Boris? I texted in reply. Yes, it's me. What was he doing there? Are you okay? I texted back. Yes, but very sleepy. We've been doing those 8 balls, OMG. Smiley face. And then another ding. Great fun party. You, living under underpass? NYC, I texted back. Sick in bed. Why are you at MGM Grand? With KT and Amber and those guys. Winky face. Then coming in a second later. Do you know of drink called White Russian? V nice tasting, not V good name for drink though. Boris had texted. You can't believe the last few days. I rolled to face the wall and texted back. MGM Grand? KT Bierman? The answer came almost immediately. Yes, also Amber and Mimi and Jessica and KT's sister Jordan, who is in college. Smiley face. What WTF? You left at a bad time. Smiley face. And then almost immediately before I could reply, got to go, Amber needs her phone. Call me later, I texted back, but there was no reply, and it would be a long, long time before I heard anything from Boris again.